One of the great things that's lauded in modern gaming is the ability to click a button, have a program download a game, install it, and then have it play flawlessly without any further configuration on your part. This is actually slower than what we had before, a device called a cartridge that we could plug into our respective machines and play instantly, beating the load speeds of cassettes and floppy disks into oblivion.
Stop! You violated the law!
After all, you can't get any faster than instantaneous, can you? Going from loading Super Robin Hood line by line off a cassette tape in minutes to booting up Burning Rubber from a cartridge was such a stunning change in 1990, and it also has absolutely nothing to do with DOS gaming because this happened on an Amstrad. Commodore, Tandy, BBC, Amstrad, Sinclair and Apple are just some of the names who developed incredible microcomputers, and this back catalogue of fantastic games was further expanded by the transition from microcomputer to personal computer, and the likes of the Amiga 500, the Atari ST, the PC-98, the Macintosh, and of course, the IBM PC. These days, people bemoan exclusives, but you should have seen what it was like back then. While there were endless ports and endless arguments as to which was best, there were also exclusives that never got ported elsewhere. Not to mention the console scene, which had far more competitors and far more exclusives than it does now. These days you've got a clutch of systems to potentially design for, and porting things over is exceptionally easy. PC, Xbox, PlayStation, Switch and mobile, which consists of iOS and Android mostly. My favourite thing to do to show the wealth of systems in the past is to trot out John Van Canegham's classic RPG Might and Magic 2 Gates to Another World. According to Moby Games, and in alphabetical order, this game was released on the Amiga, the Apple II, the Commodore 64, DOS, the FM7, the Genesis, the Macintosh, the MSX, the PC-88, the PC-98, the Sharp X1, the Sharp X68000, and of course, the SNES. That's 13 different platforms, and it doesn't even include all the available computer systems at the time. So while consolidation is given the big thumbs up, and the users largely aren't discriminated against for sticking to one system anymore, it's like seeing multiple stars wink out, without ever knowing what was there. Unless you're British and were around in 1990 and owned an Amstrad, you probably will never have experienced Burning Rubber. Why not? Well, when I did a review of the game, I went to see how it performed on other systems and discovered that it didn't. There weren't any ports. It's exclusive to that Amstrad ecosystem, one of the few decent games that was, since most of its catalogue consists of ports from the Spectrum or Commodore. It varied from computer to computer, with thousands of ports to various systems reducing the exclusivity issue. But generally speaking, each system had a clutch of 100 titles that didn't appear anywhere else, and a further clutch of those that were brilliant. You could make the argument that had these developers not been in possession of a Spectrum or an Apple II, they would have been using a Commodore PET or an Amstrad and released their game. But that's a pure hypothetical response. We'll never know, and their games may well have turned out very differently on different hardware. Why all this talk of ports and exclusives? Because choice is a good thing, and developers had all kinds of different ways of doing things that have long since been standardized in modern times. And the more you standardize something, the less special it becomes, the less different it feels. A tangible something is lost, even when playing something on an emulator as opposed to real hardware. Each of these great systems offered something a little different from their contemporaries, and coders responded to that in kind, whether it was the resolutions or color depths or sound options, or simply the way the processor worked. Games not only accommodated but highlighted and coded for and around these strengths and weaknesses, and it was fascinating to watch young and gifted developers cut their teeth by doing so with someone else's work, before going on to release fantastic titles of their own. In modern times, most PC games are written on the same free engines, with a clutch of in-house alternative in niche cases. Some of the better developers will do their best to differentiate their game from the crowd through their design decisions, but the underlying 3D mechanics of their creation is being handled by the same thing as any other number of games. You might look at two different games powered by something by Unreal at first glance and say to yourself, "Whoa, these are completely different!" But in the background, your brain is spotting things that it can't put into words about how it has seen this before. When you play the Sentinel or Elite on a BBC Micro, it's not going to feel like anything else you ever do. Games written in assembly language for very specific machines, rather than using pre-built engines and coding to plug things in like Lego. It's an archaic and painful labour of love that results in something unique, rather than adhering to the standards and expectations of others. Hardware of the time was the same. There were all kinds of different components and peripherals and machines that each had their specific way of operating. Some of these seem particularly clairvoyant with hindsight. Others seem utterly crazy. It made things interesting and, dare I say, fun. Now these crazy designs have settled down, everything has become homogenized and safe. If you're willing to grasp one control scheme, then the same will apply to any other system you use for that scheme. The 9th generation of consoles both use AMD processors and are glorified PCs with similar control schemes. From top to bottom, any deviations from rigid design guidelines have been sidelined to niche equipment, rather than challenging the mainstream. Gone are the quirks and intrigue of each system, like growing up playing King's Quest on a PC Junior as opposed to a port of the game to IBM compatibles, or beating your friends in a Quake deathmatch because your over-caffeinated hands had a space orb attached to your bright purple machine, or in my case, playing split-screen GoldenEye with the glorious Nintendo 64 controller around the same time. We've courted convenience, immediacy, and ease of use at the expense of our sense of wonder, our innovation, and utilizing the greatest advantage that computers had over any other system: the ability to create something that simply can't be found anywhere else. This spirit of exploration and differentiation can still be felt today when I fire up a DOS game at random and get completely lost, having to consult a manual in order to even operate it effectively. Not because it's something I couldn't figure out eventually, but comparatively speaking, it's utterly impenetrable compared to the spoon-fed tutorial-laden titles that comprise the bulk of modernity. Back in the 90s, I had the ability to use BASIC, DOS, Windows, Macintosh, and even Linux, and having knowledge of one certainly made it easier to learn another. But there was still that learning curve. When I first encountered an Apple Macintosh, I couldn't immediately start operating it because it behaved differently than Windows. Just like how DOS used different commands than the one I had previously used in BASIC. Now we have a general regression in skill sets, to the point where children are touching monitors and even picture frames and wondering why they're not scrolling.
Why is this not working?
It's sad but inevitable that the increasing ease and similarity of operation between these systems would lead to such things. But this is the mere tip of a homogenized iceberg. Just wait until all our neural implants are certified and come from the same clutch of hideously wealthy corporations. Then there's only going to be one way to operate everything. The continuous drive toward that has had a negative impact upon the games we play too. If players are used to a very specific way of doing things, they're going to gravitate in the direction of a game that does the same. Now picture a player base that only knows a clutch of ways of doing things. They don't read manuals, they don't study control schemes, they know what they like and they like what they know, and they're all burnt out from doing the same thing over and over by their early 30s. Thankfully, there are some modern games that take the concepts of the past and expand upon them, flying in the face of this, and older players have embraced them, pumping hundreds if not thousands of hours into them, in defiance of the samey sludge surrounding them. They might be a vanishing minority of the overall player base, but at least they exist. Long may it continue. The choice in both machines and hardware allowed for a huge variety of thought and input that went into the games made in decades past, to a degree that you're just not going to see mustered with any frequency in the here and now, because the standardization of computing has befallen us. It's not without its merits and positive elements that I failed to touch upon, but ultimately the negative impact that it has had on the arena of human thought and experience far outweighs any other convenience we might think it has blessed us with. And that's why gaming from the past is better, because it came from that time where there were so many different hardware configurations, and in no better place is this displayed than the magnificent and diverse titles that DOS has been blessed with.